My dear chosen one, there are wounds that don't bleed, but they haunt. Not because they were louder than your love, but because they carried a silence you couldn't explain. You gave your soul to someone who felt destined. You thought it was divine. Everything aligned in ways that seemed sacred. But over time, the beauty began to drain you. Your light dimmed. Your voice hesitated. And you didn't understand why something that once felt like home now felt like slow erosion. What you didn't know is that this wasn't love falling apart. This was your spiritual threshold being tested through a contract your soul made. Long before you had a name, some connections don't come to bless. They come to awaken. The one who broke you may have played their part perfectly, not as a villain in a human story, but as a mirror in your soul's journey. And it's a hard truth to accept. Sometimes the one who betrayed you was never here to stay, but to unlock the exact pain that would force you to evolve. That false flame carried an assignment: to collapse your illusions so something greater could rise in you. You weren't being punished. You were being summoned into your divine identity. The betrayal wasn't the end. It was the beginning of your coronation. So if your heart has been carrying questions that no one ever answered, this message is yours. If your spirit still aches for closure that never came, stay with me. What you're about to hear isn't just a story about heartbreak. It's about sacred preparation. If this already speaks to your soul, let it echo. Like this video, subscribe for more, and write in the comments, "I accept the crown that came through the fire." Because what felt like devastation may have been your soul remembering its throne. You thought you had finally found someone who saw you, someone who resonated with your essence, who spoke your language without needing translation. It wasn't just chemistry. It felt like recognition, the kind that awakens a memory in your spirit. Conversations flowed like prophecy. The synchronicities were undeniable. The emotional pull was magnetic. And deep down, a part of you whispered that this was it, the one you had waited lifetimes for. But what you didn't yet understand was that what looks and feels divine on the surface can still carry distortions beneath. The enemy doesn't show up wearing darkness anymore. Sometimes he comes dressed as everything you ever prayed for. As the bond deepened, something inside you slowly began to dim. It wasn't obvious at first. It showed up as fatigue, self-doubt, spiritual confusion. You found yourself hesitating in places where you used to move with clarity. The person beside you was still saying all the right things, still playing the part. But your soul was unsettled. You tried to silence that feeling, told yourself it was just fear of intimacy, fear of receiving love. But the truth is, it wasn't love. It was energetic infiltration masked as affection. You were being spiritually tested, and you were failing. Not because you were weak, but because your heart was too open to believe in deception. You kept showing up. You kept loving harder. You thought your devotion could heal what was clearly misaligned. You believed that if you just held on long enough, the cracks would seal themselves. But cracks don't seal with effort. They expand with silence. And in your silence, your light began to bleed out. The emotional manipulation became more subtle, more psychological. You started to lose your voice inside the very place you thought would give it volume. And what's worse, you blamed yourself. You internalized the dissonance as personal failure, never realizing that you were being strategically drained for a purpose not yet visible. There are relationships that don't come to complete us. They come to confront us. And what you were really facing wasn't just a flawed human. You were facing a contract, a soul agreement designed not to comfort you, but to collapse you. Not because God wanted you to suffer, but because you had asked, before this life, to remember who you really are, and to remember sometimes everything false must be stripped away. That person came into your life like a storm dressed as a sunrise. They didn't stay to walk with you. They came to shake the foundation you were building your identity on. They came to disturb the illusion that you needed someone else to activate your worth. The more you gave, the more you disappeared. And still, you held on. Still, you believed there was something sacred to protect, something divine to preserve. But love doesn't demand your silence. Love doesn't make you shrink. And in time, your soul began to whisper louder. You started waking up from the fog. Your body felt it first. The exhaustion, the anxiety, the sudden moments of disconnection from your own center. The emotional weight no longer felt romantic. It felt oppressive. Something inside you knew. This wasn't growth. This was energetic bondage, and your spirit was crying for release. And yet, a strange sense of duty lingered. Like you were meant to endure this, like leaving would be a betrayal of your calling. You questioned yourself daily. Was this resistance or refinement? Was this warfare or initiation? And here is the truth that changes everything. You were right to feel conflicted. Because your soul did recognize something ancient in that person. There was a contract, a karmic echo, a spiritual handshake made in realms beyond memory. That person agreed to play a role, and so did you. And the role was this: they would challenge everything you thought you knew about love, so that only the truth could remain. Not every betrayal is born of cruelty. Some are assignments carried out in unconscious obedience to a higher plan. That soul, the one who hurt you, may never fully understand what they did or why they did it. But on a deeper level, they delivered exactly what your soul needed to remember its authority. You didn't just survive a heartbreak. You crossed a threshold, and every tear, every collapse, every sleepless night was a part of the sacred dismantling. The false flame didn't ruin your destiny. They fulfilled it. By breaking the structure you built on illusion, they made room for the crown you were always meant to wear. It was only when everything inside you collapsed that you finally stopped clinging to the fantasy. The mask fell, the truth cut deep, and the silence between you both grew louder than any apology could fix. You realized the connection you once thought sacred had become a battlefield where your soul bled quietly. And still, there was a part of you that resisted letting go. Not because you loved the person, but because you feared what their absence would reveal about your own emptiness. That's when the real battle began. Not between you and them, but between who you thought you were and who your soul was becoming through the fire. In the aftermath of betrayal, the world around you may have kept moving. But internally, time froze. You questioned everything. Your worth, your intuition, your connection to God. You wondered how a heart so pure could attract something so cruel. And in those quiet, broken moments, the enemy whispered his favorite lie: you were never enough. But here's the truth the darkness never wanted you to find. Your pain was never proof of your weakness. It was evidence of your calling. What hurt you the most was only able to reach so deep because of how open your soul already was to to light. The same depth that was used to break you is the depth that now makes you unshakable. And yet, even in that awareness, the residue of their presence lingered. You'd wake up with their name echoing in your chest. You'd feel their energy in your dreams. Certain songs, places, or random memories would flood back like ghosts refusing to rest. It wasn't just grief. It was a spiritual cord that hadn't yet been severed. You weren't just letting go of a person. You were disentangling timelines, closing soul contracts, breaking energetic agreements that had been signed across lifetimes. And that's why it felt heavier than death, because in a way, it was. A death of who you used to be with them, and the slow birth of someone you never imagined you could become. There were days you begged for clarity. You asked God for closure, for signs, for understanding. You wanted justice, or at least a reason that made sense. But heaven remained quiet. Not because you were abandoned, but because sometimes silence is how God rearranges you from the inside out. You were looking for answers, but God was building you into one. The more you searched outward, the more your spirit was pulled inward, toward surrender. That's where everything began to shift. The pain stopped being a prison and started becoming a portal. And even though you still couldn't explain everything, you began to trust that something sacred was being written through your ruin. That moment, when you stopped fighting the pain and started listening to it, became your point of initiation. Not in public, not with validation, but in the quiet chambers of your soul, where God meets you without noise or performance. You realized you didn't need revenge. You didn't need them to admit what they did. You needed to remember who you were before they touched your light. And in that remembering, something ancient inside you reawakened. A strength that wasn't loud, but holy. A peace that didn't deny what happened, but transcended it. You were no longer begging for healing. You were walking as healing. Still, healing is not a straight line. There were moments when you questioned if you'd ever feel whole again. Days when the weight returned out of nowhere. Nights when your heart ached without warning. But instead of running from it, you began to recognize the pattern. That pain wasn't regression. It was release. Your body, your heart, your energy field, they were shedding layers that no longer belonged to the version of you that had been crowned through the fire. What once would have broken you now passed through you like waves that no longer held power. You weren't just recovering. You were reclaiming. And then came the realization that changed everything. This wasn't just a breakup. It was a spiritual realignment. That person didn't fail to love you. They succeeded in playing the role they were given, to push you toward your throne, to challenge every illusion you still clung to remove from your life anything that wasn't rooted in truth. And though they didn't know it, they delivered you back to yourself. Wounded, yes, but wiser. Torn, yes, but transformed. You didn't just survive the false flame. You emerged from it with the authority of someone who has been to hell and heard God's voice there. And then, something you never expected happened. You stopped seeing them as your enemy. Not because you excused what they did, but because your soul began to see through different eyes. Through the eyes of understanding, not attachment. Through the lens of divine orchestration, not emotional confusion. That shift was subtle, but it changed everything. You realized that while their actions hurt, their presence had purpose. They didn't come to be your partner. They came to be your portal. And without knowing it, they carried the exact frequency needed to awaken what was still asleep inside of you. Painful? Yes, but precise. Like a divine surgery that only grace could authorize. That's when God began to whisper deeper truths into your spirit. That nothing, not even betrayal, happens outside of divine permission. That some souls take on roles of conflict in our lives, not out of cruelty, but out of assignment. In higher realms, it's not about blame, it's about agreements. And as heavy as it sounds, that person's betrayal was written into your story not to destroy you, but to initiate you into your next dimension. They activated a part of your soul that comfort never could. And their role, as brutal as it felt, was exactly what your evolution required. Not because you deserved to suffer, but because you were chosen to rise. There's a kind of growth that only comes through breaking. A kind of clarity that only arrives after confusion. And you, in all your brokenness, were being prepared to walk with a weight of purpose that required your hands to be empty. The false flame taught you what false love feels like, so you'd never settle for it again. They showed you what spiritual manipulation looks like, cloaked in charm, so your discernment could sharpen beyond human perception. You weren't just learning to love better. You were learning to see. And that sight, spiritual, sovereign, and unshakable, was always the goal. The day you stopped asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and started asking, "What is this making of me?" marked your ascension. That shift in question unlocked your authority, because, from that moment on, you were no longer trapped in a victim narrative. You were rooted in a higher one, the narrative of divine becoming. You weren't just someone who got hurt, you were someone who got awakened. And now, everything about you has changed. The way you love, the way you trust, the way you move through this world with quiet spiritual fire. What once shattered you now speaks through you. Your voice has become a vessel for truth. And as the healing deepened, you began to see beyond just your own story. You saw how many others are still asleep in illusions that look like love. You recognized the signs in their eyes, the same ones you once carried. You knew what it felt like to be bound to someone who drains you while calling it devotion. But instead of judging them, you started interceding. Your empathy became your ministry. Your past became someone else's permission to wake up, because you understood what most never realize. The ones who've been through fire carry the keys to freedom. Then came the confirmation your spirit had longed for, even when your mind had stopped believing. God showed you, in dreams, in signs, in deep knowing, that the contract had been fulfilled, that their role was complete, and that you were free to release the tie, not in anger, but in wisdom. There was nothing more to prove, nothing more to fix, nothing left to hold. You weren't the broken version of yourself anymore. You had outgrown the frequency that kept pulling you back. You had graduated. And in that spiritual graduation, the crown was placed. You didn't earn that crown by pretending to be perfect. You earned it by surviving what was meant to spiritually assassinate you. You earned it by loving when it wasn't safe, by forgiving without closure, by rebuilding yourself with trembling hands and a holy will. Your authority didn't come from being unscarred. It came from being unshaken. And now, that crown sits not on your head as decoration, but on your identity as confirmation. You are not who you were before the pain. You are who the pain revealed. There is a difference between being healed and being transformed. Healing mends what was torn, but transformation redefines what it meant to be torn in the first place. And what happened to you wasn't just a wound. It was a realignment, a recalibration of who you are, what you carry, and what you'll never again accept into your field. That experience cracked the illusion of romanticized suffering. It stripped you of spiritual naivety. It forced you to see the difference between intensity and alignment, between emotional highs and energetic truth. You stopped asking for signs and started honoring your inner knowing. That shift alone is a revolution, and what felt like betrayal has become one of your greatest revelations. You now understand that not every soul who enters your path is meant to stay. Some only come to hand you a mirror, show you what's unhealed, and disappear. Their presence may feel sacred, but their exit is part of the blessing. Because without the rupture, you might have never questioned the foundation. Without the disillusionment, you might still be worshiping the version of love that was never rooted in truth. The pain taught you to discern. But more than that, it taught you to choose yourself without apology. And that is a sacred power most never reach. As you walk forward, you realize something deeper. The enemy wasn't just the person. It was the lie you believed about yourself in their presence. That you needed to earn love. That you had to shrink to be accepted. That your light was too much or not enough. But now, those illusions hold no more weight. The version of you that tolerated mistreatment no longer exists. You don't vibrate there anymore. And so, even if that person returned, they would find a stranger standing in your place, someone who has remembered their divine origin, someone who no longer negotiates their value to feel wanted, and it goes even deeper. Because this transformation wasn't just for your benefit. You were being shaped into someone with authority over a specific kind of pain, so you could become a guide for others lost in it. Every experience, every breakdown, every tear was a chapter in your spiritual training. And now, you don't just speak from insight, you speak from embodiment. You walk with a weight that can't be imitated. Because it was forged in silence, tested in darkness, and confirmed in the presence of God. That is the kind of power no title can grant and no enemy can steal. There's a kind of royalty that doesn't need a throne to be recognized. It's not in how loud you speak or how many follow you. It's in the energy you carry, in the way you've mastered your own emotional storms, in how you show up now, grounded, alert, compassionate, but never compromising. You're no longer seeking a fairy tale. You're building something sacred, something real. And that crown on your spirit is not the reward for surviving. It's the evidence that you've been entrusted with truth. You didn't just wake up. You were initiated. Still, there are moments when the past knocks on your heart like a familiar ghost, not to haunt you, but to test your alignment. The old memories, the old desires, even the old ache may resurface when you're most vulnerable. But now you respond differently. You no longer beg the wound to become a blessing. You no longer confuse pain with purpose. And even when the shadow tries to whisper, you know who you are. That is the quiet power of someone who has faced the fire and chose not to become it. The lesson is sealed, the contract is complete, and your crown is permanent. And this is where your story shifts from survival to service. Because you were never meant to stay in the ruins of that old relationship. You were meant to rise from it and become a safe place for others. You are now walking proof that betrayal doesn't end you. It births you. That heartbreak isn't always an attack. Sometimes it's an invitation. And because you answered it, the heavens have marked you with new authority. not just to avoid false flames in the future, but to teach others how to see them before they burn. There's something sacred about someone who knows what it's like to be broken by love and still chooses to love again, but this time from a place of wholeness. That's where you are now. You no longer confuse intensity with intimacy or possession with connection. You've seen how charm can be a mask, how flattery can be a trap, and how spiritual talk can be used to disarm your discernment. But none of that has made you bitter. It's made you sharper, more reverent, more selective about what you allow into your life. You now understand that real love doesn't take from your light. It reflects it. And until that kind of love arrives, you're not waiting, you're building a life, a calling, a sanctuary within yourself that no false flame could ever burn down again. And maybe, just maybe, you've started to realize that the crown God placed on you wasn't just about overcoming that one relationship. It was about preparing you for the weight of your purpose. Because spiritual royalty comes with responsibility. And now that you've walked through betrayal and found your soul on the other side, you're no longer walking blindly. You're walking with vision, with clarity, with compassion that has been baptized in fire. You are no longer trying to convince others of your worth, because your very presence speaks it. The way you carry your silence, the way you honor your peace, the way you say no without guilt, and yes, without fear. These are the marks of someone who has been crowned not by people, but by process. You're no longer trying to get back to who you were before the pain. That version of you no longer fits where you're going. What you thought was a detour was actually a doorway. The heartbreak didn't delay your destiny, it escorted you into it. And everything that felt like loss is now revealing itself as sacred subtraction. What was removed from your life was never aligned with your expansion. You see that now, and you bless it, not because it didn't hurt, but because it helped. Even in its cruelty, it served. Even in its silence, it spoke. And in its ending, it created space for the life that was always meant to emerge from within you. Let this be the moment where you stop carrying the residue of a contract that has already been completed. You don't need to rehearse the pain anymore. You don't need to spiritually investigate what God has already resolved. You've cried enough tears for someone who was never meant to stay. You've written enough pages in a story that was only ever meant to be the prologue. Now it's time to write something new, not from survival, but from sovereignty. Not from longing, but from alignment. This is your permission to let go with reverence, to bless them and release them, to walk forward without resentment or regret. Because where you're going, you can't afford to carry ghosts. The truth is, you were never destroyed. You were redefined. And what was meant to kill your spirit actually crowned your soul. That crown isn't physical. It's energetic. It's spiritual. It's the way you walk now, the way you speak, the way you no longer chase what doesn't honor your light. You carry wisdom in your posture. You carry clarity in your presence. And even if no one sees it, heaven sees it. God knows what it cost you to stand where you stand now. And because of that, your steps are now ordered. Your presence is now marked. And your authority is now rooted in truth that cannot be shaken. So if you're still holding on to that story, let this be your release. If you've felt the resonance of this message in your chest, then you already know. This wasn't just another failed relationship. This was your anointing. This was your rise. This was your soul remembering itself. If this message has touched you deeply, Leave a comment below and say, "I bless the fire that crowned me," and manifest these words to the universe to keep your crown strong and firm with you. I still have a special request to help us grow the channel. I would like you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and continue walking with us with God's blessing. You are not alone. You are becoming, and your growth is unstoppable. Because once God crowns you through that which was sent to kill you, not even the gates of hell can stop what comes next. I want to thank everyone who supports us through Buy Me a Coffee. Your support helps us improve our videos every day and always offer the best content. If you would like to support us, the link is in the first pinned comment. Continue this moment of spiritual elevation and watch the recommended video that is appearing on the screen now, or follow the playlist of the Secrets of the Chosen. Just click on the screen and expand your essence even further. Thank you very much for being here and for being part of this community. See you in the next video.